we're dealing with that herd mentality, and they don't want to be the ones to step out of the herd. Howdy, folks. I'm Alfonso Rachel and Buddy Bill Whittle. This is the Virtue Signal, and we are going to, you know how we do. We try to set this record straight on what actual virtue is so that, we're not ruled by the so-called virtue of perverts. Speaking of perverts,
too late.
Nah, man, we still got some fight.
No, of course.
All right, so I saw this. I'm thinking about Lindsey Graham's latest stance on abortion and what I saw with Dr. Phil. I saw Lila Rose on a Dr. Phil show, holding ground, right, on his show. Starting with Lindsey Graham, if I understand correctly, he's proposing that a bill of like 15 weeks. Abortion is, let me see, I think up to 15 weeks. Abortion we're going to make sure that abortion will still be legal. And that ties in with Lila Rose going on the Dr. Phil show. And Dr. Phil is just sticking to the science or the lack of a consensus concerning the scientific community about when life begins. It's just so funny, like how selective people can be about what science says or what science doesn't say.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, I've noticed that.
And I mean, it just, this blockhead is just sitting. I mean, he's got a head like a cheese wheel, man. And he's just ignoring everything that and Lila's just breaking it down. She's even got people in the audience going, "Oh snap! Wow, that makes sense." Of course, you're gonna have your hardwired knuckleheads in there that are gonna stick with this lie.
Hardwired knuckleheads. Right? Yeah, that's.
Which is a disgrace to knuckleheads, man, because I think of myself as a knucklehead, yeah. Right? But it's just sad when to see this guy who's, I guess, seen as such an intelligent and reasonable person be so unreasonable about life, and then when you have like
who are you talking about in this case?
Dr. Phil, and then also when you have traitors. Like Lindsey Graham, who is gonna capitulate on this. I mean, we just had this opinion with Roe v. Wade, and I mean, I'm not too happy with the fallout for that, and you guys understand why. But then for Lindsey Graham to even go even further and say, "No, we're gonna do this thing with 15 weeks," I'm like, "Wow, what are you doing?" No, I mean, what am I missing here, Bill?
I've talked a lot on other shows about this idea of distributed intelligence and the wisdom of crowds, and that has led me to look very closely not at polls, political polls, because polls have a small sample. You can be very selective about the polls. Only certain people will answer a poll, and so all these potential biases. And you can, in fact, obviously, you can commission a poll to tell you whatever you want to tell you. But betting odds. Online betting is a much more reliable predictor because you've got money on the line, right? This is not an ideological position. This is I want to get this right so I can make some money. So since self-interest is involved, it tends to be a lot more fundamentally true. And somewhere about 2 or 3 months ago, these trend lines that have been going like crazy, the Republican line going up, the Democrat line going down. We had something at the peak, we had something like a 92%, 93%, maybe it was 96% chance of taking the House and like a 67% chance of taking the Senate. And then all of a sudden, these lines immediately crossed. I mean, just zoom. Now they're starting to head back a little bit, but they crossed. And that is about the time that the Roe v. Wade decision came out. Now, I don't know whether that is the cause or whether it's part of the cause or anything else. And I am certainly not saying we need to modify our morality and our opinions and our philosophy based on what other people say. But since the question is about Lindsey Graham and so on, I suspect that what they're trying to do is mitigate some of that. The reason it took me so long to see that might be it is because, frankly, I don't see any of when we were told if Roe v. Wade would be overturned, we'd see buildings on fire in the streets, right? We haven't seen that. It's not a constant topic of conversation out there. It's not really on the radar. It looked, but those numbers did change. So we're at the point now where we have to ask ourselves a practical problem. And I'm not suggesting a solution. I'm just saying this is a problem that has faced us from the beginning. It's not going to go away. It's a problem that will be here as long as humans are here and as long as politics are here. And here is the problem. It is possible to be 100% true to principles, and because of that, you never win elections. And because you never win elections, your principles are never put in place. That is the great dilemma, right? That's the dilemma. And we're willing to compromise on our principles on a bunch of issues. We're willing to compromise on it. But this one particular issue is a life and death issue. This is an issue where compromise is complicity, essentially. And so that seems to be where we are. The question we have to ask ourselves, at least among the people who are watching this show, is not a question of whether abortion is morally right or wrong. We already know the answer to that. We did a show just a week ago or 2 weeks ago on this abortion porn. So I know what side I'm on, and I know I'm on the right side. And again, I know what this sounds like, and I'm not saying this. I'm raising this as a practical question to an extremely difficult problem. What do we do about this issue of it doesn't matter how principled you are if you don't get elected? So the practical question isn't whether this is right or wrong. The practical question is, what did you say Lindsey Graham was proposing, a 10-week or 15-week?
Yeah, 15 weeks.
Is a 15-week ban better than a full-term possibility of abortion? Some people would say yes. If you believe that life begins at conception, then, as I do, then it essentially isn't, right? It's just you're just picking a different day. Mm-hmm. But this is where we are, and what it tells me is that, once again, as we talked about on our other show this week about law enforcement, is that we cannot expect politics to solve the moral problem that we have in our society.
Right.
The politics will reflect the moral stance of the population, and the long-term solution to this dilemma that I mentioned about compromising and is half a loaf better than no loaf. The solution to this is not necessarily to accept that. The solution to this is to change people's minds about the fundamental issue. And that is where we need to be fighting. And we have made certainly large gains, believe it or not, in that regard. Because I remember when Roe v. Wade was implemented in 1973, I think. I remember that time very well. This was just it was a lot more liberal time than it is today. So I suspect that's the motivation behind Lindsey Graham. I don't know if that's going to do more harm than good. I certainly don't think that something like this is going to get people who are pro Roe v. Wade to suddenly go, you know what, those Republicans aren't bad at all. I'm kind of in favor of, no. This kind of compromise doesn't win over anybody. All it does is lose support among your base. And on this particular issue, I think on this one, I'd rather be on the side of the angels and go down to defeat than pony up with the devil and maybe sneak across the line. I don't feel that way about other issues, but I do feel that way about this one.
Yeah, I see this kind of, self-serving sellout approach. I don't really see the redeeming value in it. When Lindsey's going to talk about something like 15 weeks, when this person is going to qualify as a human being, I mean, what that makes me think is like, well, how about we do this also? When it comes to Black people, if you are about this shade of Black, you can go ahead. You can make them slaves. You can force it. But if they're lighter than that, then you can't make them slaves. Okay, so it's like. But unfortunately, I can't use that argument because the Civil War wasn't about slavery.
Let me just jump in. Let me just jump in on that for just 1 second, because it's a really important point about the abortion issue, right? The reason that you can't have a card, right? I think it was Family Guy who did that or something. It's like, I'm going to hold up this card to this person and see which skin color they match, whether it's okay or not. The reason you can't do that is because the variation in skin color is a perfect spectrum. There's no binary decisions here, right? There's no one shade that immediately turns into another. It is an absolutely uniform spectrum. Same thing for the life of a fetus. That either becomes a person at conception or at birth, but there is nothing between those 2 points that is a dividing line, with the possible exception, and I think this is a reasonable one, of the registration of the heartbeat of the infant in question. But that's the issue, right? If there was some sort of biological event that happened between month 0 and month 9, you could at least start triangulating on that, but no one day is any different than the day before. So right. Your argument is absolutely correct. Where do you arbitrarily draw this line at 15 weeks?
Indeed, man, and and even the whole heartbeat, that's a moot point, because we've seen the end result of where these people are trying to get to. Even a kid can be born, and they'll still be like, yeah, well, we want another month to decide if we're going to let the kid live or not. So we've always known that this is infanticide, whether it's prenatal or postnatal. That's always been the goal. It's unfortunate that I'll say about what I'm thinking is unfortunate with the incident of Lila Rose and Dr. Phil. This argument about when the life begins, and as we understand it, it begins at conception. And we have these people who try to say that it's, whether it's scientific, trying to hold authority on what's scientific, trying to hold authority on what's constitutional. Man, I just think it's interesting how the Constitution writes it. It doesn't say all men are born equal. It says all men are created equal.
That's a fascinating point.
And the thing is,
it's a fascinating point. There's
only, as we can see, nobody's actually be born equal. You're going to be born in different circumstances and all that sort of stuff, and attributes that you'll have, and the things that people may do better than somebody else or whatnot. But interestingly enough, the founding fathers, they wrote it in as created equal, because there's only one thing that really makes us truly equal, and that's how we're created, and that's the marriage of the male seed to the female egg. That's how we all got here. And once that creation happens, not the birth, the creation, you have rights. And founding fathers, man, they're I don't know. It's like these people think that the founding fathers were like these dumb people, primitives or something like that.
No, they were the most educated people that ever lived.
Very educated. I mean, they knew of people who would disqualify the personhood of women, who would go in and cut off bloodlines by going and cutting babies from women's wombs. And they're like, no, man, we're not gonna continue that here. That baby has rights. You won't be cutting babies from people's wombs to exterminate their bloodlines. So to think that they didn't know anything about abortion or abortifacients or anything like that is patently false. So, but the bottom line is that they're trying to, make it like we have no sense of empathy. Like one woman in there, she starts getting all emotional and say, what about a 10-year-old girl, who's been molested, and you're going to force her to have a child and stuff like that. It's like, you don't think that bothers us? Of course it does. But here's the thing that y'all keep leaving out. How is it the kid in the womb's fault? You're going to make that kid pay the penalty of death for what somebody else has done. We have the empathy to know that you don't make somebody pay the penalty of death for somebody else's crime. Okay, but we're seen as the ones who lack empathy and lack compassion. And these are the things that they're able to sell, and using these emotional arguments and spinning people's emotional triggers to make this stuff work, while claiming to be all scientific and pro-Constitution.
This whole issue and what you just said as an example are prime examples of how the rhetorical intelligence of the left can win an argument by simply defining the language. Mm-hmm. Not coming down on you or anything, but you said that this theoretical 10-year-old girl had been molested by this guy. She wasn't molested by him; she was raped by him. And so we end up talking about this issue as pro-life versus pro-choice. These are both advertising terms. They're both designed to make our product look better relative to the other product. The argument is a pro-abortion, anti-abortion issue. And anytime I hear pro-life or pro-choice, I just say, no, we're not going to go down that road. We're going to stick to the issue, and we're not going to let the language pull us between, would I rather be a person who's in favor of life or a person who's in favor of choice? I'm in favor of both. But the thing that we can make up the most territory, my original point about you cannot expect the politics to save you from the morality of the people who vote. It just doesn't work that way. The morality of the politics will reflect the morality of the people who send them there. And this is where the problem is. And so when I talk about the power of language, the first thing that we should be operating on in terms of a societal counterattack to this is we shall never, ever let anybody say this is my body again. That anytime anybody says it's my body, it's my choice, you got to stop right there. Okay, because the scientific factual truth of it, and I'm not a biologist, but basically, as you said, when that sperm enters the membrane of the egg, the DNA of that egg changes. Prior to conception, the DNA of the egg is carrying the mother's DNA. The sperm is carrying the father's DNA. You've got two separate individuals, and an unfertilized egg is, in fact, that person's body because it's got the same DNA as any other cell. When that union occurs, this chemical miracle occurs, and it is no longer the DNA of the mother. It's the DNA of the mother and the father in a combination that is one in, I forget what the total numbers are, it's 1 in 4 trillion or something, possible combinations. That's more people than will ever live on this planet. So that instant, that moment, that is a unique individual cell that is rapidly becoming human in form. But its uniqueness and its difference from the mother and the father occurs at that instant. Mm-hmm. And so when we get into an argument about whether somebody should be able to do something with their own body or not, we've already lost the argument. Of course, I don't want the government telling me what to do with my body. I don't want the government telling me I have to take injections of any kind. It's my body. I can do whatever I want with it. And everybody believes this. So when we buy into that argument, we lose. So when you hear that it's my choice, it's my body, you got to stop. It's meant with respect. It's not your body anymore. It's in your body, but it's not your body. And we're going to have this discussion predicated on truth, not on this fiction that makes things sound a lot more morally equivalent than it is. That's how we lose these fights. Is it's the same thing with guns. We talk about gun rights. We talk about the Second Amendment in the Constitution. We talk about the founders. We talk about high capacity magazines. No. Does a 98-pound school teacher have the right to defend her life against 3 200-pound men in a parking lot at 2:00 in the morning? Yes or no? And that's the argument. And when we stick to philosophy, we win. And when we get into the weeds of linguistics and splitting hairs and legal definitions and policy, we always lose, which is why they constantly try to drive us towards those arguments.
Absolutely. And that's the key thing right there, Bill, is that they drive us to those arguments because a philosophy, a so-called philosophy in the Republican voting tent is that we should stay away from social issues. Don't bring up social. Don't bring up abortion. Don't bring up, same-sex marriage. Don't bring it. It's like, we don't have to. They will always bring these things up. And
that's right.
And because Republicans have been told to not address these issues, you don't get sharpened on them, and you remain a dull instrument and turn it, and then they end up winning with it. So, this. When we're talking about it's their body, and don't get me wrong, because a lot of pro-life people will let them know, no, it's not your body, and then we'll go into the science of it. But we're dealing with people, as I've said many times before, people who are given over to their imaginations. They have their policy is built on reimagining things. They imagine their
magical thinking. Yeah.
Absolutely, their anthem is imagined by John Lennon. That's just where they live. So we can give them these well-reasoned arguments and basically break down, the individual that's in the womb and stuff like that. But their emotion and their imagination dictates to how they're going to conclude what that is. So once again, it's a point of how do you communicate with these people who don't register the language of reason, but are instead given over to their imaginations? I mean, these are the people who claim to be the coexist people, but they don't want to coexist with that kid. These are the people who talk about equal rights and equity, but they don't want to give equity to that kid, and they don't want to give equal rights to that kid. They're always in total contradiction to their own narrative and canceling themselves out. Now we understand that and trying to tell them that, they don't get it. Now, don't get me wrong, Bill, because you've probably had like one-on-ones where you see the bell go off and you're like, oh, snap. But a lot of times we're dealing with that herd mentality, and they don't want to be the ones to step out of the herd. And, but there has to be, for me, Bill, that's been the answer for so long. They've shown us how they've driven their narrative, and using playing on emotional triggers and being given over to imagination to promote their lie. And that's just a method that hasn't been really explored to be able to connect with these people to tell them the truth. And I think it can be done. So, folks, we hope that you'll support us here at BillWhittle.com. Share these videos. Become a member at BillWhittle.com. Help us keep these shows on the go. And, we want to do our part to creatively and be compelling with promoting truth and sanity and setting the record straight on what virtue actually is, and not let virtue be dictated by these perverts. Thanks again, y'all. I'm Alfonso Rachel for Bill Whittle. Good night.